The truck bed reeked of sweat and diesel when Klara Weiss pressed her camera to her ribs. March 1945, somewhere in Mississippi. The guards had stopped naming towns 3 days ago. Through a slit in the canvas, pine trunks speared upward, too tall, too green. The sky a pale glare of indifference. The heat struck first. Not the dry heat of Cologne, but a damp, living weight that wrapped her throat and refused to let go. Her gray nurse's uniform clung to her back like damp paper. Beside her, Anneliese Krauss, a nurse from Munich, was already crying quietly into the dust. Out. Move. American voices rolled through the air, thick, stretched vowels that turned commands into drawls. Klara jumped from the truck. Her boots sank into red clay that cracked like dried wounds. 89 German nurses stood blinking against a merciless southern sun. A captain, young Midwestern Ernest, stepped forward, his uniform stiff despite the humidity. Clipboard under one arm, faith on his face. "Welcome to Camp Clinton," he said in careful German. "You will be treated under the Geneva Convention. You will work in the hospital." Klara had already stopped listening. She catalogued details instead. Wooden barracks with screen doors, polite watchtowers pretending not to watch, a limp American flag in air thick enough to drink. Evidence, she thought, proof that the Reich had fallen to quantity, not quality. Her hand brushed the Contax camera. One photograph, that was all she needed, to show her mother that even in captivity a German woman could still look down her nose at her captors. The guards herded them toward the barracks. The gravel crunched like dry bread under their boots and the heat refused to loosen its grip. Inside, the air thickened. 12 metal bunks in 2 rows, mattresses so thin they looked punished. A fan labored at the window, pushing humidity from corner to corner without relief. Klara chose the farthest bunk and sat, listening to the springs groan. "They'll kill us," whispered Anneliese, unpacking her case. "Feed us to the colored soldiers, I heard them." "They'll bore us to death first," said Renate Falk, stiff at the window. Former League leader. Ideology wrapped in bone. Americans lack discipline for proper war. The room smelled of soap and rusted iron. Klara said nothing. Her mind wandered to food, real food. Maybe January, perhaps February. Turnip soup and a coin-sized sausage slice she'd cut with a knife just to pretend it mattered. Hunger had been a companion longer than victory. When the dinner bell rang at 1800 hours, they expected punishment, watery gruel, black bread, thin contempt. Instead, a mess hall waited, metal trays lined like mirrors, steam ghosting upward from enormous vats. The air smelled of salt and something alien, pepper and smoke. Even the light seemed foreign, filtered through grease and noise. The cook was a tall black man in a sweat-stained apron. He smiled faintly as he filled Klara's tray with something red-brown and heavy. "Texas chili," he said, words she barely understood. A slab of white bread followed. The scent hit first, meat, beans, heat. It bit her nose before it touched her tongue. They sat 12 nurses in silence, staring at the steaming mess. Women who had amputated by candlelight now faced a dish that glowed like molten clay. Renate prodded it with her fork. "It looks like mud," Anneliese sniffed. "It burns without fire." Klara raised her camera. The light was perfect. Sun bleeding through slats, painting the chili in shades of bronze and danger. She composed the frame. Her tray in the foreground, Anneliese's disgust behind, a still life of German refinement against American excess. "Taste it," Anneliese whispered suddenly. Klara frowned. "For the photograph," Anneliese insisted. The others leaned forward, breathless with a mix of disgust and curiosity. Klara felt the old pull of performance. The shutter would capture defiance, not surrender. She turned slightly toward the window's glow and lifted the spoon like a weapon. The shutter clicked. Salt struck first, then smoke, fat, and heat. Real fire. The spice bloomed behind her teeth, racing up her throat, lighting her veins. Instinct said spit. Pride said hold. Hunger said more. Another spoonful. Then another. The table watched as Klara Weiss, nurse, believer, survivor, devoured the enemy's food until only a red smear remained. When she looked up, her plate gleamed. The camera stared back, unblinking. Outside, the southern wind rattled the flag. Inside, something in Klara smoldered, quiet and treacherous, the understanding that pride starves faster than flesh. The others were watching now. Klara Weiss felt the familiar weight of performance, the need to embody control, to resist even hunger as if resistance itself were virtue. She lifted a spoonful of the red-brown chili, turning slightly so Annalisa Krauss could frame her in the camera's view. The shutter clicked. Salt hit first, then smoke. Real fat followed. Thick and honest. Something her body remembered, though her mind recoiled. The beans dissolved on her tongue. The meat crumbled like surrender. The heat rose again, searing and sweet, and beneath it was something terrifyingly human. Flavor, comfort, memory. Her expression faltered. This was peasant food. American slop. She should sneer, spit it out, maintain the myth. But her hand betrayed her. Another spoonful. Then another. The motion felt mechanical, scoop, lift, swallow. The body was staging its own rebellion, bypassing ideology, answering only to survival. 3 years of turnip soup and black bread had hollowed her until instinct ruled. Somewhere faintly, Annalisa said her name, but Klara didn't hear. The spoon scraped the plate. When had she switched to a fork? Every drop, every smear of red oil disappeared under her hunger. 90 seconds. Maybe less. The plate gleamed clean, polished by desperation. She looked up. 12 women staring back, silent. Women who had amputated by candlelight, who'd carried the myth of superiority like a cross. Now they watched one of their own dissolve into something primitive, devouring the enemy's food like an animal tasting life. The camera sat between them, its black lens unblinking. Klara's hands shook, not from fear, but recognition. She would eat this again, tomorrow, and the day after. She would queue with her tray and hold it out like a beggar because pride was lighter than hunger. What breaks a person? Not politics or ideology, but something smaller. The betrayal of taste. That photograph, the one Annalisa took, caught the exact second Klara Weiss learned the body has no flag, no Reich, no loyalty beyond need. Later she tried to laugh, said it was strategic, keeping strength for escape. But that night on the thin mattress, the fan stirring air like breath, she could still feel the burn of chili on her tongue. She turned on her side and waited for morning, her stomach restless, her pride quietly digesting itself. 2 days later, laughter broke the barracks. It started soft like steam escaping, then swelled into something contagious. Annalisa sat on her bunk holding the photograph. Klara's face caught mid-transformation, spoon frozen halfway, eyes betraying everything. "Stop," Klara said. Her voice was low, dangerous. Annalisa couldn't. 3 others crowded closer. The giggling spread, brittle and wild, like glass breaking in slow motion. I said stop, but the dam had burst. 8 German nurses, prisoners of a lost empire, laughed until it hurt at the sight of their most defiant comrade surrendering to American food. Klara lunged, snatched the camera, and locked it in her footlocker. The laughter thinned, awkward and guilty, dying like a fire smothered under wet cloth. Silence returned, but something had shifted. The photograph existed. The truth existed. The image of a German woman, disciplined, proud, reduced to appetite, was no longer rumor. It was fact. For the first time, the barracks felt heavier, like the walls had learned to judge. The women avoided her eyes. Even Renate, who worshipped ideology like scripture, couldn't look at her plate without remembering. Pride had melted faster than cheese. 2 weeks later, the truth would find them all. Valentine's Day came in the form of a 1938 Ford that shimmered like polished faith. 3 church women in pastel hats climbed out, carrying boxes wrapped in pink tissue paper, their faces composed into militant benevolence. For the prisoners, the eldest announced, her Mississippi accent thick as syrup. Even the enemy deserves the Lord's love. The camp commander, an Ohio man unprepared for the moral weight of captured women, accepted the donation with polite confusion. The boxes smelled faintly of sugar and roses. The women smiled like missionaries. That afternoon, every German nurse received a paper heart with English words written in careful cursive. Jesus loves you still. Inside the wrapping, chocolates, soft and brown, melting before they touched their tongues. Klara bit one. Sweetness bloomed. No fire this time, just warmth. She looked at the others. No one laughed. No one spoke. Outside, the flag flapped lazily against the sky. Inside, the room filled with a silence thicker than faith. For the first time, none of them knew whether the Americans were humiliating them or saving them. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Each box held a heart-shaped sampler wrapped in red foil. The nurses assembled in the mess hall for distribution. 89 women who had spent 3 years chewing sawdust bread and gray soup now holding bright American hearts in their hands. The silence was reverent, uneasy. Renate Falk rose. Everyone expected it. 34, with sharp bones and sharper faith, she had built her life on obedience. Before the war, she led a League of German Girls Brigade in Dresden, earned medals for devotion. Now she held the Whitman's box above her head like a sacred charge. This, she declared, is propaganda. Her voice carried the clipped discipline of a parade ground. American decadence wrapped in red foil. They think they can buy us with sugar. Klara Weiss said nothing. The word sugar burned on her tongue like the memory of chili. Renate turned toward the trash bin with ceremonial slowness. To prove that we remain German, she said, I will dispose of this publicly. Someone, perhaps Anneliese Krauss, murmured a protest, thin and frightened. Renate ignored it. She lifted the lid, raised the red box above the opening, and paused. That pause lasted less than a second, but felt like confession. Every woman in the room understood it. The brief flicker of memory when principle trembles before desire. Then came the hollow thud. Renate dropped the box and returned to her seat, spine rigid, face perfect. The others watched in silence, then began their own reckonings. Some unwrapped their chocolates instantly, mouths working fast, eyes closed. Others rationed, breaking pieces like medicine. A few mimicked Renate, throwing theirs away, though their hands trembled. Klara bit one, slow and deliberate, tasting sweetness like a secret. By 2 a.m., the barracks filled with faint noises, foil crinkling, paper rustling, tiny betrayals disguised as whispers. Klara lay still, eyes open, listening. Across the room, Anneliese did the same. Neither spoke. Both heard the sounds coming from Renate's bunk, the soft tearing of paper, the delicate hum of guilt. Pride has its own vocabulary, and hunger speaks every language. The noises continued until they stopped abruptly. By dawn, the air smelled faintly of chocolate and salt. By breakfast, Renate Falk was missing from the lineup. Someone said exercise. Someone else looked away. Klara found her in the latrine 20 minutes later, crouched between two sinks, her knees drawn to her chest. The empty red box lay beside her, destroyed. Not empty, obliterated. Every chocolate gone. Every foil insert scraped clean until it shone silver again. The illustrated paper guide, the one that showed which flavor was which, lay torn into pieces with clear bite marks. Klara stood frozen. The ideological commander of their barracks sat barefoot on cold tile. Her fingers smeared gold from foil. The sound coming from her wasn't crying. It was laughter, dry and fragile as broken glass. I ate the paper, Renate said, her voice splitting between shame and hysteria. I thought it might be chocolate, too. Because why wouldn't Americans make even the paper taste like sugar? She held up her trembling hands. Look at this, gold foil. I licked it clean, like an animal. She began to shake harder, laughter breaking through like static. Do you understand? In 1938, I reported Frau Kellerman to the Gestapo for hoarding butter. They sent her to Ravensbrück. For butter. She looked down at her hands. And last night I licked gold foil for taste. Klara sat beside her on the cold floor. The air was damp with bleach and humiliation. You thought it was chocolate, she said softly. The guide sheet, Renate whispered, her words collapsing under their own weight. The one that showed which chocolate was which. I told myself I'd eat just one, the vanilla nougat, just to know what American sweetness tastes like. Just one, her voice trembled. But I couldn't stop. I ate all of them. Every single one. She pressed her hands against her eyes. And then I ate the box liner. The silence answered for her. The hum of the fan outside filled the room, indifferent. For a long time, neither woman moved. The war was thousands of miles away, but defeat was here. Sitting cross-legged on the floor between foil and tears. Ideology had always promised discipline, purity, sacrifice. But hunger was older than doctrine. Hunger didn't salute or march or wait for orders. Klara stood finally and looked down at the ruined box, a heart-shaped void where loyalty used to be. Somewhere beyond the walls, a train passed, and the air trembled like a confession too late to matter. Morning came thick with silence. The barracks smelled faintly of soap, sweat, and something sweeter, like memory left too long in the sun. No one mentioned Renate Falk. Her bunk sat empty, the sheets half-tucked, the pillow hollowed by restless dreams. The women ate in silence. Even the clatter of trays sounded cautious, as though noise itself might reopen the wound. Klara Weiss looked at her own hands, still stained faintly from red foil. The camp commander walked past their table, his boots clicking softly against concrete. He didn't look at them. They didn't look up. By noon, rumors had settled into a single truth. Renate had broken. Someone said she'd been taken to the infirmary. Someone else swore she'd been sent to a separate ward for re-education. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was the silence she left behind, the sound of a voice that had once kept them straight-backed and sharp, now gone hollow. For the first time since arrival, the women didn't stand for inspection. The guards didn't press them. Even the Americans understood when dignity dies, order follows quietly. That night, the fan hummed like a confession. Annalisa Kraus lay awake, staring at the ceiling. "Do you think she meant to?" she whispered. "Eat all of them?" Klara didn't answer. Outside, cicadas buzzed like static and the southern air pressed through the screens. "Maybe it wasn't hunger," Annalisa murmured. "Maybe it was memory." Klara turned her head slightly. "What kind of memory tastes like chocolate?" she asked. "The kind that doesn't forgive," Annalisa said. Neither spoke again. The light from the guard tower flickered through the slats, cutting the darkness into disciplined squares. Days passed without orders. No drills, no speeches. The guards grew lazier, almost human. One of them, an American from Ohio, tipped his cap to Klara once awkwardly, like he wasn't supposed to. She didn't return it, but something in her eyes shifted. The camp became quieter, slower. Even the flies seemed to move with more purpose. Somewhere beyond the wire, spring was happening, though they wouldn't see it. Inside, women washed uniforms, wrote letters they'd never send, and stopped pretending not to notice when someone laughed softly at nothing. Then, one afternoon, an American cook brought a new dish to the mess hall, bread pudding, heavy with raisins and sugar. "For the ladies," he said, smiling. The room froze. Klara looked at Annalisa, who stared back, trembling between want and shame. No one moved first. The cook blinked, confused by the stillness. Then slowly Klara stood. She walked to the front, took a plate, and sat down. The others watched as she raised the first spoonful. She didn't pose this time. No camera, no audience. Just a woman tasting what was given and not spitting it out. The sweetness hit like surrender. Warm, thick, honest. It tasted nothing like victory, but everything like peace. Across the table, Annalisa followed, then 2 others, then 10. For the first time in months, the sound in the mess hall wasn't silence or discipline, but the quiet scrape of spoons against metal. The cook smiled and turned away. He didn't need to see the moment pride finally yielded to survival. The women ate, each bite softening something unseen. Even hunger, it seemed, had learned to forgive. That night, Klara Weiss sat alone on the steps outside the barracks. The air smelled of rain and rust. She looked at the sky, still strange, still American. Behind her, someone began humming, a song without words, soft and uncertain. Klara closed her eyes. The melody wasn't German or American. It was the sound of something older than both, something that had outlived flags and faith and fear. For the first time, she didn't think of home. She thought of warmth and the taste of something sweet that didn't need to be earned. The announcement came not from the commander, but from the radio. Static, then words in English that none of them needed translated. "Germany has surrendered." The sound filled the mess hall like fog, soft, creeping everywhere. No one clapped. No one cried. Klara Weiss stared at her spoon, still dripping with syrup from breakfast. Around her, women froze mid-motion, suspended between disbelief and exhaustion. Annalisa Kraus pressed a hand to her mouth as if the truth might escape in a gasp. Somewhere near the back, someone whispered, "It's over." The words felt foreign, unbelievable, almost cruel. Outside, Mississippi's spring was in full bloom. The pine trees shimmered in green that seemed indecent after years of gray. The guards lowered their rifles but didn't leave. The prisoners walked slower that day, not because they were tired, but because they didn't know what to do with freedom that wasn't theirs yet. Renate Falk, returned from the infirmary, stood by the fence, her posture broken, her hands still shaking from something that no longer had a name. The flag above her drooped in the heat, heavy and unwilling to celebrate. That evening, the camp commander gathered them in the recreation hall. His voice was steady, professional, almost kind. "You will be repatriated," he said. Within weeks, the women didn't cheer. They didn't move. Home was rubble, ghosts, and ration cards. Home was the sound of footsteps at night and letters that stopped arriving. Klara thought of Cologne, of her mother's handwriting, of a street that might not exist anymore. Return, she thought, is not the same as going back. The commander cleared his throat. Until then, he said, you are still guests of the United States. The word guests settled over them like dust. That night, Annalisa Kraus found Klara sitting near the barracks steps, her hands wrapped around a cold Coca-Cola bottle someone had traded her. The glass sweated in the humidity, tiny beads catching the moonlight. You'll go home? Annalisa asked. Klara looked toward the fence where the guard lights hummed softly. If there's a home left, she said. Annalise nodded. I used to dream about leaving this place. Her voice wavered. Now I'm afraid I might miss it. They both laughed quietly, the sound soft and dangerous. Days became ritual again, work, meals, waiting. But something had shifted. The guard spoke gentler. The women smiled without reason. One evening, a truck brought a phonograph to the yard. American jazz spilled into the air, strange and alive. The women stood at the edge of the field, listening. Renata Falk appeared from the shadows, her hair newly cut, her face lighter, almost human. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The music did it for her. The horns rose and fell, and for a moment the camp felt less like a prison, more like a heartbeat. When the rain came, it fell without warning, heavy, cleansing, southern. The women ran out of the barracks, laughing, faces turned to the sky. The guards didn't stop them. For a few minutes, there were no uniforms, no ranks, no enemies, just people standing in the rain, washed of history. Klara Weiss closed her eyes. The world smelled of wet clay, sugar, and pine. The sound of thunder rolled through the distance like drums announcing something new. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of it, the kind that starts quietly in the space between hunger and forgiveness. The envelopes arrived on a Tuesday morning, brown and official, stamped with Allied seals that gleamed under the Mississippi sun. Each bore a name typed in perfect English. Klara Weiss turned hers over twice before opening it. Inside, dates, destinations, signatures. Repatriation to Germany. Departure October the 2nd. The word return felt heavier than the paper. Around her, the barracks had gone quiet. Annalisa Kraus sat frozen, the same letter trembling in her hands. Hamburg, she whispered. They're sending me home. The word home broke mid-syllable, as if it no longer fit inside her mouth. Renate Falk didn't open hers at all. She just stared at the envelope like it might bite. Her bunk was neatly made again, her posture restored, but her eyes stayed far away. My sister writes from Dresden, she said finally. She lives in a church basement now. 40 people in one room, no one replied. The letters felt less like promises and more like verdicts. Outside, the guard tower light flickered. The war had ended, but its echo still hummed in every muscle, every breath. The papers didn't say free, they said processed. That afternoon, the camp commander stood at the podium again, reading names with military precision. All returnees will report to Bremen Transit Center for debrief and medical clearance. He paused, glanced up. You'll be among the first to go home. No one cheered. He cleared his throat. For those with special circumstances, written requests will be considered. The word considered felt like mercy disguised as paperwork. Klara watched Renate staring at her unopened envelope, her jaw clenched, her eyes shining like she was fighting something too private to name. That night, the barracks breathed heavy silence. The letters lay on every bunk like gravestones. Annalisa Kraus turned hers over and over until the corners bent. Do you think they'll let us stay? She whispered. Klara didn't answer. The air smelled of rain and soap. I can't go back, Annalisa said. Not after this. Not after learning to laugh again. Klara looked at her friend, then at the fence, the faint hum of the generator painting the night in gold lines. Maybe staying, she said softly, is another kind of escape. Neither of them slept. By morning, Renate Falk was dressed in her cleanest uniform. Her hair was braided tight, her face pale but steady. She walked to the commander's office, envelope in hand. The guard stepped aside without orders. Inside, she stood before his desk. I wish to remain, she said in careful English. The commander blinked. Remain, you mean? Stay in the United States? She nodded once. Germany has enough ghosts. I can serve here, anywhere that isn't home. He hesitated, then reached for his pen. There's no procedure for this, he said. Then make one, she replied. When she returned to the barracks, she wasn't alone. Klara stood. So did Annalisa. Then another, then 3 more. 17 women in all, one by one, standing against the idea of home. The air thickened. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow. We'll write the same, Klara said. We'll ask to stay. Renate nodded, her eyes wet but fierce. The guard at the door said nothing. He just watched as 17 women began writing their own rebellion, not with rifles or marches, but with ink on Allied stationery. The sound of pens scratching paper was almost holy. That night they didn't celebrate. They sat in silence, the smell of ink and damp wood thick around them. Klara Weiss opened a bottle of Coca-Cola she'd saved for months and passed it around. Each woman took a sip. Sweet, sharp, alive. To what? Annalisa asked. Renate smiled faintly. To not pretending anymore. The toast was quiet, the kind you whisper when you're afraid the world might overhear. Outside, the pines swayed under southern wind. Inside, 17 women who once served the Reich chose to belong nowhere, and found in that a kind of peace. The wedding dress wasn't white. White was for beginnings. This was yellow cotton, second-hand, bought with 3 weeks of hospital wages and pressed smooth the night before. Klara Weiss stood before a cracked mirror in the church basement, fastening the last button with steady hands. Behind her, Annalisa Kraus tied the sash. You can still turn back, she whispered. Klara smiled faintly. Turn back to what? The reflection looking back at her wasn't German or prisoner or enemy. It was something quieter, something human. Outside, the church bell rang once, slow and uncertain, like it was asking permission. The First Baptist Church of Jackson smelled of wax and magnolia. 47 people filled the pews, most of them black. A few white faces in the back pretending not to be afraid of history happening in front of them. James Porter waited at the altar, his suit borrowed, his hands trembling only when he thought no one was watching. The war had ended, but the world hadn't learned peace yet. Reverend Porter, his uncle, stood with a Bible open to 1 Corinthians. When Klara stepped through the doorway, the room seemed to inhale. The ceremony lasted 8 minutes. The vows were simple, the silence between them heavy as history. Do you take this man? The Reverend asked. I do, she said. The accent bent the words but didn't break them. When he said, You may kiss the bride, James Porter did, and the applause that followed wasn't polite. It was startled, honest, alive. For a moment, time didn't know which way to move. The world outside the church still divided itself by color, but inside, 2 people had just redrawn the lines by breathing the same air. The reception took place downstairs. Folded chairs, pound cake, lemonade, and too much nervous laughter. Annalisa Kraus poured punch with shaking hands. Renate Falk sat alone, turning her slice of cake like evidence. I should be in Dresden, she said softly. And I should be in Cologne, Klara replied. But we're here instead. Renate's eyes met hers, haunted, grateful, unfinished. In the corner, someone started a record player. Count Basie's Jumpin' at the Woodside filled the air, brass bright enough to feel. James extended a hand toward Klara. You ever danced to Freedom? He asked. She laughed. I don't know the steps. That's fine, he said. Neither does Freedom. He pulled her close and the room came alive. Feet tapped, skirts swayed, history loosened its collar. Even Renate Falk, who had once reported neighbors for dancing to swing music, stood up when Annalise grabbed her hand. The first steps were clumsy, her movements rigid, her training fighting every beat. But Annalisa wouldn't let go. 1, 2, 3, she whispered. Renate followed, then stumbled, then laughed. Real laughter, thin, cracking, miraculous. The room erupted in applause. Someone shouted, Again! And the record kept spinning. Klara Weiss paused mid-dance, her dress clinging to her, her new husband's hand warm against her back. Across the room, 2 women, former enemies, former believers, were dancing like the world hadn't tried to break them. A flash went off. Jerome Porter, the groom's cousin, capturing the moment. The photograph would later show movement caught in stillness. 2 women laughing under a single hanging bulb, skirts twirling through the air thick with hope and dust. Klara looked at her husband. This is impossible, she whispered. He smiled. So was the war. And they kept dancing. When the music slowed, the guests drifted out into the night. The air was thick with summer and tobacco and a future too fragile to name. Renate stood at the doorway holding her shoes, her hair undone. "What will they call you now?" she asked quietly. Klara thought for a moment. "Mrs. Porter," she said. "And you?" Renati smiled, faint and tired. "Just Renati. No titles left." The women embraced for the first time, not as soldiers of lost nations, but as survivors of themselves. Outside, the cicadas hummed, and the stars watched without judgment. The last photograph of the night would live for 60 years on a mantel in Chicago. Two women caught mid-spin, laughing like time had forgiven them. On the back, in Klara Porter's careful handwriting, a single line: "The war ended the day I stopped being hungry." Chicago, 2003. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and old books. Afternoon light fell through lace curtains, dust drifting like snow in the glow. On the mantel sat a single photograph, two women dancing in a church basement, laughter caught mid-motion. Klara Porter had dusted that frame every Sunday for half a century. Now it gathered stillness instead. Her daughter Evelyn stood in front of it, holding the letter from the nursing home. She went quietly, the nurse had written. She said she'd lived 3 lives and all of them had happy endings, just not at the same time. Evelyn turned the photograph over. On the back, in delicate blue ink, her mother's handwriting: "The war ended the day I stopped being hungry." She traced the words with her thumb. Her father, James Porter, had died years earlier. His baseball glove still hung by the door, the leather cracked with memory. On the bookshelf stood 2 Coke bottles, empty, saved from another lifetime. Between them, a folded piece of red foil. Evelyn smiled. She had never understood why her mother kept it. Now she did. Outside, the city hummed with rain and traffic and the endless rhythm of people who no longer remembered. Inside, time had stopped somewhere between 1945 and forever. Evelyn carried the photograph to the window. The street below was gray and wet, the air cold against the glass. She imagined her mother at 26, standing in the Mississippi heat, camera in hand, pride in ruins, heart still beating. How strange, she thought, that survival can sound so much like surrender, and that surrender can sometimes look like grace. Later, she found the old Leica wrapped in linen, the same one her mother had carried through captivity and across oceans. When she lifted it, dust bloomed like ghosts. The shutter still clicked. She pointed it at the window, pressed down and captured nothing but rain. Somewhere, miles of history folded into a single moment of sound. A photograph no one would ever see, but her mother would have understood. Sometimes Evelyn thought memory isn't about keeping what happened. It's about forgiving what didn't. That night, she placed the photograph back on the mantel. The faces inside it still laughed, untouched by time. In the corner of the image, barely visible, stood a man near the punch bowl, her father, smiling. She hadn't noticed him before. The past, it seemed, had been waiting for her to look closer. The radiator hissed, the rain eased, and the apartment settled into silence. The photograph watched, patient and alive, holding the echo of a moment when the world had been rebuilt not with armies, but with appetite, mercy, and music. The photograph fades to black, but the sound lingers. A faint echo of jazz, laughter, and rain on tin roofs. History ends quietly always. Not in gunfire, but in people learning how to live again. You've just met them, Klara, Annalisa, Renate. Women who stopped being soldiers and started being human. Their story isn't unique. It's just one heartbeat in a world still learning mercy. And somewhere, right now, another story like theirs waits to be told. If this one stayed with you, don't let it vanish. Share it, remember it. Let it remind you that history isn't the past, it's a mirror. Subscribe if you believe the smallest stories deserve the loudest echoes. Because remembering isn't just something we do. It's how we keep the world from starving again. The screen fades to black. Soft strings swell, then drift into silence. Your channel logo appears in muted gold, the words, "Stories that outlived war."